Welcome to the Work Heartily podcast, where we grab no more than 15 minutes with Nashville founders and executives you know and admire, and some that you need to know, and ask them one big question. I am your host, Jonathan Barnes. I'm coming to you from the Work Heartily headquarters in Brentwood, Tennessee, where we help growing Nashville area businesses win through embedded fractional leadership. Today, I have the huge honor of having Andrew Kerr here. Andrew is the founder of 40AU, which is a specialized software development group that has worked with hundreds of founders and companies to bring their ideas to life. He is also the author of The Humility Imperative, which is a counterintuitive view of humility as a strength in leadership. I'm so glad you're here, Andrew.
Yeah,
Let's jump in. Are you ready for your one question?
I'm ready, man. Glad to do it. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Here we go. All right. What do you wish that you had learned or that you had known earlier about scaling?
Well, so our business has always been focused on one of our kind of core values is passion for growth, right? So scaling and growing the business has always been kind of where the fun was for us, right? And I remember telling my partners, when we had been doing it a couple years, that for whatever reason, I don't remember the exact circumstance, but it was kind of a tough year, or we were going through something as a founding group, and I kind of told them, I said, this year, is really about how much pain can we take as leaders and sort of shoulder through, and I thought at the time that was pretty appropriate, and I think that a lot of times as a founder, there are certain things that you have to take, and you got to be the one that answers the call at midnight, or you got to be the one that takes that cranky call from a client who things aren't working out exactly as you thought. And so there is some truth to that. But I think what I've realized, as our companies continue to grow, when I started, we had 10 people. Every chunk of new employees, where you go 50 people, 100 people, we're now up to almost 175, is different, right? And so
Mm.
there's different challenges along the way. And when I think back about, you know, sort of taking on too much of that pain as the founder, I wish, and I think I always had more capability in the organization that I had tapped into and used. I wish I'd used that sooner, right? And I was telling the team, one of the examples that kind of came to light for me recently was we've just now 10 years in introduced an org chart, right? So we made it past that 150 person mark without an org chart, and we kind of thought that was a badge of pride when really we were just a little disorganized at that point. So it's kind of one of those things where I remember early on, we didn't have anybody that had formal management experience other than myself. And so I said, "Here, okay, here's what we're going to do. I know from the stats that people leave. They said people don't leave their job, they leave their bad manager, right?" And so I said, "Well,
Right.
here's the simple idea. I just won't have any managers, Jonathan, and I'll just do all the performance reviews for the whole company." And we did them
Well,
twice
all
a year.
150.
That's right.
Yeah.
So when we got to 100, we were right around COVID, and you can imagine how those performance reviews were real uplifting.
I'm sure.
It's sad. Everybody's scared. So I was like taking on a lot of that myself. And that was hard. And I started, it was that year where I realized, well, this isn't going to work anymore. And then,
Right.
by the way, all this pain and all this stuff that I've taken on as the founder, now guess what? There's nobody in my organization that knows how to do performance reviews still, now that we're 5, 6, 7 years in. And so this thing that I thought I was doing was well intentioned. We've been reading a book called Multipliers. And so the idea is that a good manager multiplies the talent around them, right? And yet there's also this tendency that we fall into called being an accidental diminisher. And so I was accidentally, taking away the opportunity to learn how to do performance reviews and have tough conversations from basically all the other staff that I had. And I really
I
think
have.
that I had overdone it and probably taken that too far.
Yeah. I'm curious. Was it because that nobody else in the team really wanted to do that, or you just hadn't asked the question, "Hey, I need to be a multiplier here," versus just taking it all myself?
I think it was, again, you have to be careful as a founder or somebody that's scaling an early stage company. I also like doing performance reviews. It was a strength of mine. And so it was something that I felt like it kept me in touch with our people. I felt it was
Sure.
great to have an approachable executive who could get into conversations and really make people feel connected. And so I could tell myself and rationalize that part of it was, yes, we didn't have a lot of people that knew how to do it, but it also was a strength of mine that I was reluctant to give up even as we were scaling, and again, accidentally, with good intentions, probably making my organization not stronger, but weaker.
Yeah, and I think, and maybe you could for the listeners, carry through, like, did the challenges, were those challenges of scaling the same when you were, 10 to 50 to 100 to 150, or in terms of thematically, were they about the same? And then when did it switch for you? Was it when you said, "Hey, we need to have some sort of organizational chart. We need to have some sort of responsibility and people that are leading and managing and being
Yeah.
accountable." How did
I
that
think
happen?
it's a I think it's a fair question as a leader, particularly if you're scaling a company, to ask yourself at least every year, maybe twice a year, what am I doing now that I should probably hand off to somebody?
Yeah.
And I think in certain areas of the business, probably ones that I wasn't as talented in, something like recruiting. You know how to do recruiting really well. I was able to give that up a little bit easier and a little bit sooner because maybe it wasn't a strength of mine, right? And so it's being able to spot and really be honest with yourself at each of those stages of what is something that I'm now sub-optimizing on a fractional basis if I'm trying to do it as a
Right.
part of my job versus somebody else with a dedicated focus could really do better, you know? And so that's something that I think is just a constant refrain that you have to ask yourself probably at least annually, right, as you're
Yeah.
scaling.
Yeah, I found that a lot of leaders, they loved, like you did. You loved the work. You felt like it was a connection point, but where is the tipping point where it's taking so much of your time that you can't actually really grow the company, where you're also very talented and maybe even more talented in other areas, whether it's client facing or operationally or some nuts and bolts under the hood. How can you realize that? I think that's the hardest part. Is like that self-awareness. There are ways you can do that with your leadership team or with a board of advisors or some other outside conversations. Did you have any of those kind of conversations, or was it more internal discussion or more internally in yourself? Like, hey, this is not working.
Yeah,
And I'm wondering if it happened, if it broke first before you realized it, or
yeah.
did you kind of realize it along the way?
Definitely with my partners, and again,
Yeah.
they're both really good technologists and smart architects and developers, and so we always had yin and yang strengths, and again,
Yeah.
they would take the things that were in their wheelhouse, but every year we would sort of challenge each other with those discussions. I think that's healthy. You gotta have
Yeah.
somebody to give you honest feedback about, where you're still giving a good effort and where you're kinda falling down, and I think
Right.
that's certainly helpful, but we always say, like, we would run at things pretty hard, and then we'd bloody our shins sometimes, and
Right.
that pain, hopefully that resonates with, like, that imagery. You hit your shin on something, and man, you learn where that coffee table is because you don't wanna do that again, right? And
Yeah.
so,
You
like,
you
that's how
turn the
I
lights on at night. Right.
yeah, I mean, right now, I mean, the age of AI right now,
Yeah.
everybody's having to retool and learn so fast, and, like, how fast can you run at a new opportunity before you stub your toes a little bit? And again, we're trying to learn and hopefully take that learning and put it back into the system and make us better for the next one. I feel like
Right.
that's always been a strength of our company is being able to adapt and learn, but, this is a super challenging time just to continue to press ahead and make yourself uncomfortable, but also say, "Hey, there may be somebody else better on the team that can take this ball and run with it."
Well, this is sort of a bonus question, but in line with what you just asked or what you just said. Everybody is saying that AI is taking taking away all the jobs, and everybody's going to be without a job without because AI is taking over. I don't believe that, because I think there's a soul to soul connection, a human connection that has to happen, and we see that at work heartily. You got to have some sort of executive. The executive should, if you're hiring an executive, they should understand like the nuts and bolts of your business, and then also understand how to create a better culture of growth or operations or whatever we're working on. And I think I'd be curious to know how you feel about that, about the threat, and then how do you feel like you are going to scale using the AI as a new tool? Because I see a huge opportunity for people with deep expertise, knowing the tools even better, and being the architect, being the expert
Yeah.
to help direct it. Is that your philosophy, or how are you guys
Yeah.
approaching
I
that?
mean, it's similar to what you said. I mean, I think, the first question is a tough one. Is AI going to replace jobs? I'm sure it will in some cases and
Sure.
eventually. Right now, we're right in this, one of my smart engineers calls it a Cambrian explosion of all these tools and all these new resources. And so it's this really interesting time. Right now, we're doing dozens, half dozen AI projects, and we haven't replaced any jobs yet, right? What it does require on our side is our engineers to really upskill and to maybe change their entire workflow that they've become quite attached to and quite efficient at, right? And so asking somebody to change the way they make software, right? I was trying to relate it to some financial professionals that I ran into recently. And I said, tell this to your investment bankers, right? The guys that are really good with spreadsheets and they run a whole business on it. Tell them that this is like you'll never touch your spreadsheet again, right? And so, but you're going to, and again, like that seems a really hard thing to wrap your mind around if you're in finance, right? And so this is what it's
Exactly.
like a little bit for coders right now in particular. And we're just the first industry to kind of go through it. So what it requires is we've been saying the tinkerers are going to inherit the earth. The people that are not afraid to jump in and tinker and grab these new tools and spend some extra time with them and readapt and rewire how their brain works around, what they do on a day-to-day basis. Those are the folks that are really running ahead right now. And fortunately, we got a lot of good tinkerers, and we have some folks that are still coming along and getting used to it. You have all of that spectrum of the change curve, that you're
Yes.
having to walk through this transition right now, and it's just coming so fast. So I wouldn't be so much afraid about what I tell people is AI is probably not going to take your job unless you just plant yourself like a potted plant and say, I'm not doing any of it, right? And
That's
it's
right.
more about upskilling and being willing to sort of wade into that uncomfortable spot where the workflow and what you do and even how you see yourself sometimes is changing. We call it, you got to have a little bit of ego death as a coder because
Yeah.
it's not unlike our example before where, maybe Claude is your best friend right now, but right now, if you look at him as competition, you're not going to be wading into those waters. So it's just a different mindset.
Yeah, and I've talked about this earlier with other friends and colleagues. It is not unlike when people were really against using email for communication. They wanted to use
Yep.
old school, snail mail. And I think obviously we know how that story ended, but I do believe that when people are turning to you guys and say, "Hey, how do you do this?" There's actually a benefit for you guys to be the tinkerers and understand it so that you can apply, okay, this tool works well for this type of application. We can build this at a lower cost or a very a fast speed for you guys. And actually for 40AU, it could be a lot more founders and companies see their
Yeah.
ideas come out
Yeah.
in a quicker way because you guys know how to do it. So I think there is a huge opportunity. I don't know how it's going to all pan out, but I do believe I would totally agree with you. I think there's a pretty amazing opportunity. I'm pretty optimistic about it, especially in first year industry and then other industries where we can really be efficient with what's going on, and so that we can actually have more human to human connections as a
Yeah.
result.
Well, and I sympathize. I empathize with people who have fear right now about this, right? Because you hear so much about it. The press is pushing it, but I also, in times of great change like that, I also, and what I've been telling our folks is to anchor to what your core values are and what you do, right? And the value we've always provided in our business is we help people come in and innovate with new tools to add value to their business. That's what we've always done. We just have better tools now. And so we got to pick up those new tools and get up to speed on them so we can help other people get up to speed on them, right? So the job
Yeah,
it may look different and feel different, and there's this uncomfortable growth curve we gotta go through, but the job is still the same very much
yeah,
for us, and it's just, again, if anything, we can be a lot more productive and help more people like you're saying, so
that's right.
there is that bright side to it too. Just depends on sometimes if you're a glass half empty or glass half full kind of person?
Well, I try to keep half full as best I can.
That's right.
Exactly. And kudos to you for having a mission statement that didn't talk about which tools, but just said tools in general. Because that's future proofing
That's right.
for
Yeah,
sure.
that's right, 'cause the tools will always change, right?
That's awesome.
What I tried to stress to people when I, again, wrote the book and have had opportunities to speak is that, humility is not weakness. It's not being meek, right? The very best leaders, and there's lots of data out there now as people have kind of caught onto this idea, the best leaders are both, really humble, but also bold and confident and ambitious, right? So it's that ability to marry those two seemingly opposite qualities to be empathetic and humble when you're talking one-on-one with a person, but also to be confident in setting a strategy and in front of your customers and being able so it's the leaders that can balance those seemingly paradoxical traits that really will come out and on top. And your team needs you to be confident. They need you to be bold. They need you to take chances, but they also need your humility. If you're not humble and you have a great team around you, and the example we started talking about, I don't care if you have the most diverse team with all the greatest skills. If you're the only one that talks in that meeting and your business is a pulpit for you to proselytize, well, then you're not gonna tap into the strengths of those other people. You're not gonna create even space for them to grow and contribute. So humility will serve us all well as leaders because we're about setting the table, creating an environment where others can succeed. And then sometimes you got to step out of it and say, I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to let the smarter people in the room take over. And we all could use a little bit of that.
Amen. All right, I'm gonna wrap up. Thank you so much for joining us, Andrew. This is awesome. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, share, subscribe, and share it with another founder or an executive that you know. Again, this is Jonathan Barnes at the Work Heartily podcast. We really appreciate you spending some time with us. Let us know how we can help at workheartily.com, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.